Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana Feasibility Study public meeting. The overall purpose of the study is to try to find ways to manage the risk of flooding in Tangipahoa Parish. So we have subject matter experts here from the Corps of Engineers, both up front and in the back. They're going to be giving a little presentation about 30 minutes long. And after the presentation, we're looking forward to hearing your questions and getting your feedback. So after the presentation, you're more than welcome to mingle with the Corps experts and ask them any questions you would like about the project or give them any comments you would like to. So thank all of you all for being here. And for those of you watching on Facebook Live, if you have any questions or comments you would like to leave, you can leave those in the comments section on Facebook. So again, thank you for being here and thank you for watching.
Hey, Matt, can you turn the mic off a little bit?
Yeah, good evening, folks. I'm Brandon Schneider. I'm the project manager on this project. So I want to talk a little bit about the agenda just for the presentation this evening. So we want to talk a little bit about the purpose. Mostly we want to dive into what the study overview is and our planning process, what a study looks like, what the time frame is for us completing it, how we develop measures, and then the problems, the opportunities, and all of those kinds of things. And wrap it up with the public input.
Can't hear. Back there.
Sure thing. How about now? There we go. Get a little bit of reverb off that though. So the public input process. So where we're going to be hoping to get more and more public input from you guys. So we held the meetings back in February. We're having some more meetings here. We got several more meetings that we'll be looking to schedule along the way here. So the meeting purpose is really split into twofold. Like I said, we want to convey what we know at this point in time so that you guys can also learn a little bit about the feasibility study process, what it takes for us to look at the problems, opportunities, objectives, constraints, the measures, alternatives. But then the second half, once we conclude, as Ryan had mentioned, so outside on the tables out there, we're going to lay out some maps. And we really want to hear from you where your problem areas are, what are you seeing, what floods it was that actually caused the issues that you've seen over the years. So like I said, we'll start with the study overview. So for the Corps to be able to do a feasibility study, we really have to have two different things. We have to have an authority, and that came from the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. And then we also have to have an appropriation. So that appropriation came to us that allowed us to actually start the study under the Disaster Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2022. So with those, they come with the description of how we should complete a study. And what we use is called a SMART principles. So using SMART, measurable, attainable, risk-informed, and timely planning principles to actually develop the study, develop measures, and then refer those measures back to our objectives and the problems that you're experiencing within the parish. So coordination-wise, so all of our projects actually have a sponsor. The federal government isn't the only one actually doing this study. We're working alongside a sponsor. So sponsor on this project is the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority Board, CPRA, and we do have a few of those folks here in the room tonight. Beyond that, we have a whole slew of other government stakeholders. We're working closely with the parish. We want to know exactly what they're out there building, what their plans are for building stuff, or cleaning out a ditch or anything else like that. All of that comes into the study itself. Beyond that, we also have a whole slew of other resource agencies, Fish and Wildlife, DNRs, tribal nations, EPA, that we're going to bounce ideas off of and want to talk to along the way here. And the last thing you see at the very bottom of the page is that we also want to look at any plans, reports that are out there. So for CPRA, looking at their master plan. For the parish, the numerous plans that they've developed, like their hazard mitigation plans. If a town, village, or a township has actually created an additional plan, we want to be looking at those too, so we know what they're forecasting for their future. For the study area, I'm not going to go into great depth on this. The main thing here is the study area itself is the entire parish. So it's not limited to just one specific area like the Tangipahoa River or the watershed of the Tangipahoa River, but it is the entire Tangipahoa parish. all of this ties back to the scope of the study of what we can and can't actually look at. So for this study, it is a really complex study because one, it's parish-wide. It's not in just a small little watershed. We're looking at the entire parish. And for multiple sources of flooding, from the riverine flooding on the Talbany and the Tangipahoa to some of the smaller streams along the way, some of the urban flooding that's going on, the coastal surge that'll come in on you as well. So the middle paragraph sums that up, and that the study purpose is flood risk management. So the analysis of what we'll be looking at along the way for the impacts is from coastal flooding such as storm surge and waves, but where that also overlaps with the risk of riverine and coastal flooding itself, like in the southeast portion of this parish. The last sentence that you see down there, the channels with the discharges greater than 800 CFS, i.e. the 10-year flood, is an engineering regulation that we abide by to look at. That's the larger streams. They're not the real just tiny little flash flood streams. And our H&H folks are going to go into that in a little bit more depth here in just a few minutes. The other big thing, we track is, the same kind of storms that have gone on here. We look all the way back to stuff like Hurricane Betsy and see what that looked like. But since 2005, we've looked at stuff like Hurricane Katrina all the way up into Hurricane Ida as of recent. So the planning process. So what you see there in yellow, that's where we are. So we wanted to meet with you because we want to hear from you. We want to know what exact problems you are actually seeing out there. If it's just one street and a little subdivision and you experience flooding every single time, we want to know that. We want to put that dot on a map so we can bring it into our analysis to see if there's anything that we can actually do. And that's also where the inventory and forecasting of conditions is. So a period of analysis for us goes out 50 years. So we look out 50 years from now of what we think that it's going to actually trend towards. And I'll go into that in a little bit later towards the end of the presentation on what we call the future without the project condition. And then the last two that you see there, the formulate and the evaluate alternatives, that's where we also want to hear from you tonight. If you've seen stuff out there that's working, or if you think something might work in a certain area, we want to know that as well. We would pull that in as a measure, and that could actually be evaluated by us. And so the next slide is really trying to summarize some of that input. We're going to repeat this slide again later in the presentation, but the big things we want to hear about are the problems identified throughout your communities, specifically related to flooding within the project area. And what we have captured in the problems are those areas that accurately represent what you've seen already. What storms did you actually experience the flooding in? Was it just Hurricane Ida? Was it just the 2016 floods? What type of events were you actually seeing the flooding occurring within your community? Are there any additional constraints? Constraints are something that we have to bring within the consideration of the study that might limit what we can and can't do. So if there's something else out there that you're aware of, we'd like to know about it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just briefly talk about the overall problems. It's pretty complex, as we've said from the get-go. You got flood damages from rainfall and riverine bank overtopping, storm surge, waves to both residential and commercial properties. There's several repetitive loss properties throughout the area. There's increase in the life safety risk as a result of these catastrophic flooding events. There's also numerous areas with critical infrastructure that we want to know about as well. We've got some of them sorted through, but the other one right below that, you see the increased risk to historically significant structures. There's only so many that we know about that are in databases, but if you're not aware of any others that we should be considering along the way. And then the last one that we've heard from several folks about as well throughout the parish is the increased development that has led to increased flooding. So our goals for the project are really to identify and potentially recommend actions to manage flood risk to public safety and human life, and subsequently reduce economic damages caused by the flooding. These analyses include both structural and non-structural measures, and we'll go into those in a little bit more depth here in a few more slides, in addition to natural and nature-based features. I mentioned previously constraints and considerations. So the number one constraint that we run into is avoid promoting development within the floodplain. This is actually directed to us from an executive order. But beyond that, we look for planning considerations. So I mentioned the 800 CFS, but also we look at stuff like avoiding locating project features on hazardous waste sites, avoiding and minimizing impacts to threatened and endangered species, and then also avoiding and minimizing impacts to the Tangipahoa since it's designated as a natural and scenic river. So from here, I'm actually going to turn it over to our economist so we can start talking about the existing conditions, and the information that we pull together and what we're additionally looking for. Jordan.
Thanks, Brandon. Audio check in the back. Can you all hear me? Great. So I'm Jordan Lucas. I'm an economist on the study. I want to emphasize how much we appreciate all of you turning out tonight. Your input is really important. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is what I do on the study, as well as Skylar Booker there in the back, where the economists on the study, the types of data that we use, and to help you understand how you might be able to provide information to us to make our analysis better. So what we're looking at right here is our structure inventory. So we want to know where the buildings are, and these are our primary. These are the primary assets that we look at: buildings, the stuff inside buildings, and the people inside buildings. And what we get from our H&H engineers over here is they tell us where is the water going, where does water likely go, and then we match that up with where the structures and the people and the things of value are to determine what the existing flood damages are taking place and what types of measures might be effective at reducing those risks. Another data source that we use is FEMA floodplain statistics. This is one of many data sources that we use. We understand that floodplains are not always made when flooding takes place, but this is one such data source that we use to get a better idea of where relative flooding is taking place across the parish. Critical infrastructure is an important piece of what we look at. So we're talking about hospitals, schools, fire departments, and things like that. And so we're interested in knowing if those types of buildings are being damaged by flood events, or if access to those services is being cut off by flooding.
Hi, I'm Joel Sunskis. I'm one of the hydraulic engineers on the project, and I'm going to start with talking about flooding in the parish.
Joel, you're not going to speak up like a lot.
Am I not talking into it?
Yes.
Yeah, lean a little bit closer.
Leaning closer, okay. Anyway, the main types of flooding in the parish primarily are riverine and coastal surge. And then, of course, we look at the compound nature of them too. For compound flooding considerations, we take riverine inundation and we merge it with coastal inundation. And in the areas in between, what we call the compound flooding zone, we kind of take an adaptive approach to the given depths. As far as the USAFE study scope goes, Brandon kind of mentioned this earlier. Channels with discharges greater than 800 cubic feet per second for the 10% AEP event, or the 10-year flood event, those are the things that we examine. That's really the criteria. Okay, is that better? Okay. So really the 800 CFS 10% AEP event, that's our threshold. So it's a threshold for structural measure consideration. This means that the main areas of interest are sources of flooding is from the main rivers and larger tributaries. Areas where flow is less than the threshold, we consider local drainage, and it's out of the scope for structural measure consideration. A couple of structural measures that I'll talk about here that have some design requirements. For levees that I'll talk about in more detail later on, we design them to the 1% AEP level, which would be a 100-year flood event. And for detention basins, we design them to be full at the 10% AEP event for the 10-year flood event. Rivers, streams, and creeks. As you know, there are two main watersheds in the parish, one being the Tangipahoa River watershed and the other being the Natawani River watershed. There's several major tributaries in the parish that are listed here. I won't go through and name them all off, but some of the larger ones, we are going to be taking a closer look at those. Just a point of interest, through our analysis, we were able to determine that the March 2016 event was greater than a 1% AEP event or a 100-year flood. And the August 2016 event was greater than a 0.2% AEP event or the 500-year flood. So here's the big picture of flooding in the parish. The picture you see on the right shows both the 100-year inundation and the 500-year inundation. 500-year inundation being in red. What we found is that the most significant inundation along the Tangipahoa River is between Robert and Lake Pontchartrain. South of LA 22 to both lakes is completely inundated by coastal surge. And you can kind of see the lower area where it's just completely underwater. There's large amounts of inundation and flood damage around Robert, where Washley Creek comes into the Tangipahoa River, and large amounts of inundation on the Natawani River on the I-55 border from Amy to Independence. And after the presentation, we'll have maps set up on the table that we'll go through, and if you want to talk about a particular area, we can point it out with that inundation shown on it.
So my name is Lane Richter. I'm a biologist on the project. I'll be talking about the environmental piece. Sorry, can you all hear me? So on this slide here, it's a list of the significant resources that have been identified within the parish. So this was developed in collaboration with a wide variety of agencies and stakeholders. The main thing to take from this is that as we continue through the study, and we're looking at different strategies for looking at flooding issues, we'll be assessing any impacts that would be associated with those measures. And so that can be positive, negative, neutral impacts on those resources. That full analysis will be included in a study report down the road, and then that will be available for public review. And as Brendan said earlier, there will be additional public meetings before that time as well as after for additional input. On this slide, so we've been coordinating with the state and federal agencies to identify different strategies for reducing or minimizing impacts to a variety of resources. And that's kind of, that will help feed into kind of the development of measures and alternatives. So examples of that would be, reducing impacts to threatened and endangered species or wetland habitats, those sorts of things. And I kind of blew by it on that first slide with a list of significant resources, but there's a human environment component, which is mostly what I've talked about up to this point. And then there's the natural environment, and then there's the human environment. The human environment includes categories like socioeconomics and environmental justice. The paragraph at the top here kind of shows a definition of what environmental justice means. And for this project, we've essentially trying to find ways to make sure that everyone has a chance to have their voice heard, that you can contribute comments, and then also see our decision making and provide feedback on that. And kind of in preparation for this meeting, we actually have our EJ specialist, Juanita, here tonight. She's been doing outreach in preparation for this meeting, and that outreach will continue as we prep for future meetings. And this slide, I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but it's essentially the executive orders. There's several of them related to environmental justice, and it kind of provides a framework for how we approach environmental justice issues, and then do the analysis and make that available for y'all to see and provide comments back.
What I'd like to talk to you about now are study measure development. The way we went through considering measures is we broke the parish into 30 watersheds defined by hydrologic unit codes. We evaluated each basin one at a time. We evaluated them based on structural and non-structural alternatives, focusing mostly on helping to reduce floodings. The depth of inundation and the number of impacted structures considered was what we looked into when considering these measures. Some potential measures identified to date, some of the big ones are detention bonds and detention basins and levees. We also looked at diversion channels, and another big one that we're really interested in is snagging and clearing. Just to kind of go through one of the structural measures. This here is an illustration of the detention basin. On the upper end of the image, you can kind of see a river going across. In this case, the river flows from right to left. When the river gets high enough, where that big arrow is, there's a control weir that allows water to spill into the detention basin. Once there, the water heads to the left to where that smaller arrow is, and usually that's a culvert that backs the water up and attenuates that flood flow coming down the river. And by doing that, you effectively reduce river stages downstream. Everybody kind of knows how a levee works. I won't go into great detail on what it does, but it is an embankment that we use to protect an area from river flood. On the image on the right, that's kind of a cross section of a levee. The main takeaway from this is that it has an impervious core that keeps water from traveling through it. Now, one thing to also keep in mind is that with levees, they're mostly built on sand. And sand is very porous. And as such, we have to actually design additional structures on the landward side of the levees, such as relief wells and under seepage barriers and pump stations to remove that water. But it's all an effort to keep that landward side dry. So it's really not just putting up a wall. Finally, one of the things that we've heard a lot of feedback from folks like you about is on clearing and snagging. Really, what that is removing woody debris from a channel, improving its conveying capacity. So, on the left you have before, and on the right after, nice, closer to a pristine channel. That'll convey much more. We've learned that the parish staff have been undertaking clearing and snagging operations throughout the parish, and we'll be incorporating that into our existing condition analysis. Additionally, we have also heard from the public that they would like this measure investigated further, which we will.
Thanks, Joel. So like Joel was just talking about structural measures, the idea with structural measures is you're actually going to be changing the macro characteristics of the flooding and where the water goes. But with non-structural measures, we're talking about adapting at the micro level how we can be more resilient to flooding. So some examples of that are going to be elevation of structures. So you're all probably familiar down here in southern Louisiana with elevating homes on piers. And so that's one example. And then we have dry and wet floodproofing, which is either to prevent water from getting into a building or to allow water to safely pass through a building without causing a lot of damage. So this is an example of elevation. So you can see here on the bottom, on the left, we have a home that was not elevated, and then on the right, you can see it's been elevated. And so that lifts the structure up so that it'll be out of the flood surface up to a certain type of flood event. And so this is a common one that, like I said, you all are used to down here in southern Louisiana. And this is one such type of non-structural that we'll consider. Dry flood proofing, as I mentioned earlier, we have an example here of a Pizza Hut that was wrapped at the base with a watertight membrane that will prevent water from getting into that building up to a certain depth. So this is another type of measure that we'll consider. These are some examples of when you have this type of flood proofing, typically you'll need some sort of insert or stop log that you have to put in front of the door in order, and so this requires active initiation when a flood is being forecasted. This would require an individual to place that in front of the door in order to seal that door off to prevent water from getting into a structure. Wet flood proofing, we have an example here of a fire department, a firehouse that was wet flood proofed, so this allows water to safely pass through the building. Utilities and other things of value are going to be lifted up inside that building so that when the water passes through, it doesn't cause damage. And then once that water is passed through, you can quickly get back to work. Temporary flood barriers, so these are things like sandbagging and muscle walls and things like that that can be put out in anticipation of a flood that can prevent water from getting into and around the structure. These can have a little bit of seepage, but these are largely effective when they're deployed properly. Relocation in some cases, when it's not feasible to elevate a structure or make any kind of physical modifications to the structure in its current location, we might consider putting that structure on the back of a truck, moving it into an area that does not see flooding. So this is another example of non-structural solution that we'll consider. And flood warning systems and evacuation plans. So this is exactly what it sounds like. We want to improve flood forecasting, so we want to know more in advance that a flood event may be coming and to what extent it may be coming. Warning systems so that we can get the message out to people earlier so that they can then evacuate, and we improve the population's understanding of the best evacuation routes available.
So as I mentioned, I wanted to come back to the future without project condition. It's always a little bit tricky when we talk about the future without project. That doesn't mean nothing changes. So 50 years from now, it's not exactly the same way it is today. The future without the project condition is if we didn't take an action within there. The core, the study, nothing came of that. With the parish, they're still doing what they're going to do, all the development. And so the things that we are seeing within the future without project condition are the increased flood risk from climate change impacts, additional development throughout the parish as well, new subdivisions going in. And then on the downstream end, seeing some more anticipated impacts with sea level rise. That would change our downstream where the Tangipahoa would dump into Lake Pontchartrain. That would change our condition to where it might be actually higher, which would create additional flooding upstream. Changes in precipitation and the tropical events as well. As one of the previous slides, since 2005, there were numerous events that have occurred throughout the parish, and we have to take those into consideration as we move forward and the likelihood of those events continuing on. The bottom line again, so we've looked heavily at the CPRA master plan. We continue to look at all the additional parish plans, such as the hazard mitigation plan that encompasses quite a bit of flooding information within it as well. When I originally started out talking, I talked a little bit about the problems, opportunities, objectives, constraints, considerations. So what we have to do is we create evaluation criteria and metrics that are associated with those, and those tied back to those problems, opportunities, objectives, and constraints. An easy one to talk about right now is probably effectiveness. This PowerPoint will be posted online, so feel free to hop on there, deep dive into any of these and shoot us a message. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But that second one up there, effectiveness. Is what we're actually proposing going to reduce damages? So we'll look at a lot of measures that seem feasible when we first start with them, but then as soon as we start actually digging into it, we run it through the H&H model, we look at it, we may recognize that there's a bunch of residual risk with it. So it provides a little bit of protection, but there's still a lot of leftover that is still at risk. And so with that criteria in and of itself, we'll actually be able to differentiate between each measure of which one might perform better than the other one. And this slide, I'm almost done, so bear with me just a little bit longer, but I do want to hang up on this slide just a little bit for you here. So we held meetings back in February. We did some initial scoping back then, and now we're continuing that data gathering here to try and get to an actual series of alternatives that we can actually evaluate against one another. So you see where we are here, and there's a lot ahead of that still. The next one, the big one that you'd be interested in, of course, is the tentatively selected plan. That's after we've compiled all the measures, we combine those into alternatives, and then we've evaluated them against each other to see what comes out as our most likely beneficial plan for flood risk management. Those little gray stars you see are the places currently that we've identified that will absolutely be reaching back out, holding public meetings such as this to get additional input along the way. The two arrows down at the bottom also kind of shows what we've been talking about here. That left arrow, that's where we're trying to get to alternatives that could reduce flood risk for the Tangipahoa Parish. On the right side, that's where we get to beyond the tentatively selected plan, and we're trying to scale those measures and features further down, refine them so we can get a really good idea of what the cost estimates are, what it's going to take, where the borrow would have to come from, those types of activities. So as you can see, it is a long process. It's a little over 3 years from start to finish to get there. There's a lot of reviews that we do along the way as well. So our reports will come out for public review. We do other agency technical reviews. We send them out to independent third parties to review them as well. And then we also have our division and our headquarters reviews as well. So we saw this slide before, and I wanted to bring it back up again of what we're hoping to get out of today. And I also, before I hop into this, Lane introduced Juanita. She's our EJ coordinator on the project. And so one of the things that she's going to want to talk to anybody about as well is how we got the message out today. So we got a pretty full room here today, but where else could we have gone to get advertisements out there? Postings in the library, we put it in the newspaper, we put it in Facebook, we worked with the parish to get it on their Facebook, but she's also going to want to hear from you on that. So Juanita, do you have anything else you would like to say on that?
Thank you. As you said, for this meeting today, I was doing some EJ outreach specifically to different Head Starts, libraries, and local churches. If anyone belongs to a EJ community or is affiliated via an organization that works with low-income, Black and brown minority communities, I would love to hear how we can better be of outreach, honestly. Thank you.
So this is going to be my last slide for you tonight. And so I'm going to end up concluding the presentation here. But what we're going to do is we're going to open up these doors, and we're going to have a series of maps out there. We're going to have Post-it notes. All the core folks that are here are going to be on one side of the table so that you can at least easily identify us amongst the crowd here tonight. But what we really do want to hear from you is, where your problems are. Do you have anything that's going on within your community that you don't think is being addressed from a flood risk management standpoint? Are there any additional concerns? Is there any additional data out there that we should know about? Something that's not posted online and that's in, the Amy library, and there's only one hard copy of it, and we need to get up there and we need to take scans of that. That's the kind of information we'd love to hear from you tonight. So the last slide for you, and that's what I just want to make sure I leave it on, is the contact information. So there's a web page at the top. You'll be able to go up there. That's where we're going to post, of course, when public meetings come out as well. But we'll also, the PowerPoint tonight will be posted on that. I'm going to leave this up here so you all can come up and take your picture as well, so you make sure you can get all of this. And then you can send us written comments. We do have comment cards out there tonight, so you can turn those in. Or we do have an email at the bottom that you're welcome to send us an email to, so we can get the information that way. With that, that will actually conclude the presentation for tonight. Thank you all.